scariest stories are whispered, not told.
Paris is a city of light, but that light has always been fragile. For all the beauty above ground, the cobblestone streets, the cafes and bridges, the golden dome of Les Invalides gleaming in the sun, there is a shadow underneath. A maze of tunnels that stretches for hundreds of miles beneath the city. A cemetery and a labyrinth, all at once. Most people know only the tourist section of the Catacombs, where the walls are neatly lined with skulls, where a guide walks you through with a practiced smile. People take selfies there. Children giggle nervously. But even the guides warn you, never stray from the marked path. I suppose Sophie and I ignored that advice because we thought it didn't apply to us. We were graduate students in archaeology, working on a joint thesis about funerary rites and urban ossuaries. Paris was a perfect case study, a modern city built on top of its dead. Our professors had encouraged us to take the tour, maybe get a feel for the space. But Sophie and I, we wanted more than a feel. We wanted something real, something the guides didn't show you. We'd done our research, pored over maps and old reports online. We knew that beyond the barriers and warning signs were miles of tunnels that even the city hadn't fully charted. There were stories of secret chapels, lost inscriptions, rooms that had been sealed for centuries. And a name kept coming up, Le Tombeau du Cœur, the tomb of the heart. Most accounts dismissed it as a legend, but some cataphiles swore they'd heard things or seen doors they couldn't explain. The stories always ended the same way. The door was gone when they came back. I thought it was superstition. Sophie said maybe it was a metaphor. But deep down, we both hoped it was real. We planned it for weeks. Picked a quiet November morning just before the tourist rush. Packed our bags, headlamps, batteries, chalk to mark our trail, rope, and 2 small climbing picks. Sophie brought an old map she'd copied from an archive. Half of it was blank. We bought our tickets, smiling politely at the guide. Watched as a crowd of Americans and Germans shuffled through the marked tunnels, snapping photos of the walls of bones. Then just before the last bend back to the exit, we slipped behind a pillar. No one noticed. We ducked under a rusty chain and through a low arch. The air immediately felt different. Colder, quieter. The light from the main corridor faded behind us. We turned on our headlamps and walked deeper into the darkness. At first, it was easy to believe we'd simply discovered an extension of the tourist section. The bones here were stacked too, less neatly perhaps, but recognizable. Some of them still had tags tied to the femurs, ink long faded. We even found a few candles burned down to stubs on a ledge, as though someone had been here recently. But soon, the tunnels narrowed, and the walls began to change. The air was damp, the limestone rougher. Our footsteps echoed too loudly. We followed the chalk markings left by other explorers, but they grew scarcer and scarcer. After an hour, they stopped completely. We stood at a junction of 3 tunnels, and I looked at Sophie. "Well?" she asked. I smiled, even though my chest felt tight. "Left." We took the left passage. It was there that the oddities began. First came the smell, faint at first, then stronger, sweet like flowers left to rot. Then came the markings, not chalk anymore, but faint etchings on the wall. Spirals, eyes, words in a language neither of us recognized. Sophie traced her fingers over one of them. Her breath came out in a white puff. "It's colder here," she murmured. We kept going. I don't know how long we walked before we found the door. It stood at the end of a narrow corridor, just wide enough for one person to walk through at a time. It was made of stone, and yet it looked new. The carvings on its surface were crisp, sharp. An inscription ran across the lintel. Latin. Sophie leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vita aeterna non est donum." Eternal life is not a gift. We stared at it for a long time. I don't know what made me step forward and press my hand to the stone, but when I did, it was warm. The warmth was faint at first, but undeniable, as though something on the other side of the door was alive. Sophie grabbed my arm. "Don't!" she said. But her voice was hollow, almost as though she didn't believe it herself. I tightened my grip on my pick. The edges of the door didn't seem to have hinges, but I found a crack wide enough to wedge the pick into. I pried. The stone groaned. Dust fell from the lintel. Sophie stood back, arms crossed, shivering. "Just a little more," I muttered. The door gave way with a sharp pop, and a rush of stale air hit my face. We coughed, covering our mouths, but even through the dust, that sweet smell lingered, sweet and rotten. We stepped through. It was bigger than it should have been. A chamber, circular, domed, lined with niches. Each niche held a coffin, sealed with a slab. The walls were painted in faded colors, reds and golds, but the patterns made no sense to me. And at the center, a single sarcophagus. It stood on a raised platform, not quite touching the ground. The base floated on a thin sheet of black stone, polished to a mirror shine. I felt myself walking toward it without thinking. Sophie hissed behind me, "We shouldn't be here." She was right. Every part of me knew it. But still I placed my hand on the lid. That's when I felt it. The heartbeat. It was faint, but steady, like the sound of blood in your ears. I froze, staring down at the stone, my breath fogged in the air. Sophie grabbed my arm again, her nails digging into my sleeve. "Let's leave," she said, but I didn't move. Instead, I pressed both hands to the lid and pushed. It was lighter than it should have been. It slid aside, grinding against the stone. Inside lay a figure. It was draped in a black robe. Its skin was pale as moonlight, so thin I could see the veins beneath. Its hands were folded on its chest, bony and long. At first, I thought it was a corpse, but then its chest rose, once and again. The sweet smell in the room thickened, so strong it made me gag. Then its eyes opened. They were black, no whites, no pupils, just black. "You," it whispered. The sound wasn't loud, but it filled the chamber. It filled my head. "You woke me." I staggered back, nearly tripping over the edge of the platform. Sophie screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the air around us, as though the room itself didn't want anyone to hear. The figure sat up, fluid and unnatural, its robe spilling over the sides of the sarcophagus like liquid shadow. It turned its head toward me, and the faint heartbeat grew louder. "You shouldn't have come here," it said. I backed away. We'll leave," I stammered. It smiled. The expression was wrong, too wide, too sharp. "You woke me," it repeated, and then it slid off the sarcophagus and stood, It was taller than I thought, taller than any human could be. It took a single step forward, and the lights on our headlamps flickered. Another step, and they went out completely. I grabbed Sophie's hand. "Run," I said. We bolted for the door. The heartbeat followed us, louder, faster. We tore through the corridors, tripping over loose stones, scraping our shoulders on the narrow walls. But no matter how fast we ran, every time we turned a corner, it was already there, waiting, watching, silent. We didn't stop. We ran until the faint light of the tourist corridor appeared ahead of us. We burst through the barrier, collapsing onto the smooth stone floor of the main path. Tourists stared at us, but no one said a word. Behind us, the air shifted, and the sound of the door slamming shut echoed through the tunnels, hard enough to shake the bones on the walls. We didn't look back. We didn't speak. We left the catacombs, climbed into the daylight, and never told anyone what we saw. But at night, when everything is quiet, I can still hear it. That faint, steady heartbeat, and sometimes, I swear, it's closer. People think honeymoons are supposed to be magical. They imagine lazy afternoons on beaches, quiet nights under the stars, laughter and champagne, and everything perfect. That's what I thought, too. Alex and I had only been married 2 weeks when we landed in Lima. He wanted something different. Somewhere off the beaten path, he said. Somewhere we could make memories no one else had. He picked Peru. The mountains, the ruins, the old gods sleeping in the hills. I didn't argue. On our 3rd day, we joined a guided jeep safari into the foothills of the Andes. There were maybe 8 other people in the group, a couple of German hikers, 2 older Americans, a quiet woman with a camera, and us. The guide was cheerful enough, and at first I tried to enjoy it. The valleys were breathtaking, deep green cut with silver streams, dotted with tiny villages where the children ran alongside our jeep. Birds circled overhead. The sun turned the clouds gold and pink. Alex leaned over more than once, whispering in my ear, "This is perfect, isn't it?" I smiled and nodded, but something already felt off. It wasn't just the altitude. The farther we drove, the quieter things became. The jeep rattled along dirt paths until the trees thickened and the trail narrowed. We stopped for photos here and there, and the guide told stories about Inca kings and hidden temples. But after a while, even he began to glance nervously at the sky. The sun was starting to sink, and the clouds that had been so light earlier were now heavy and gray. We stopped at an overlook above a deep valley. The guide pointed to a distant ridge, saying something about condors nesting there. And that's when Alex leaned in and whispered, "Let's slip away." I turned to him, startled. "What?" He grinned, that same mischievous smile he'd had since the day we met. "Just for a little while," he said. "We'll be back before they even notice." I hesitated, but the way he looked at me, I couldn't say no. We stepped away from the group while they were still snapping pictures and ducked behind a wall of bushes. The guide didn't even turn around. At first, it was exhilarating. We laughed softly as we hiked through the trees, holding hands, pretending we were the only 2 people in the world. The path was faint but still there, winding between moss-covered rocks and gnarled roots. "See," Alex said, squeezing my hand. "Just you and me, alone." We kissed against a tree, the air cool and thin around us. But as we kept walking, I started to notice how quiet it had gotten. No birds, no wind, just our footsteps. Even Alex seemed to notice after a while. His smile faded as he glanced around, like he was seeing the forest for the first time. "Maybe we should," I started. But before I could finish, we stepped into a clearing. The space was perfect. A circle of stones, each one taller than me, arranged in a pattern that felt deliberate, almost mathematical. They were covered in strange carvings, spirals, jagged lines, what looked like the outlines of suns and eyes. At the center of the circle was a low stone altar. Dark stains ran down its sides, old and crusted, but unmistakable. Blood. I froze. Alex walked forward slowly, almost like he was in a trance. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He crouched in front of the altar, his fingers brushing the cold stone. Then he saw it. At the base of the altar, half buried in dirt, was a golden amulet shaped like a sun. He picked it up. The second his fingers closed around it, something changed. The air shifted, hotter and colder all at once. The sky above darkened, though I didn't see any clouds move. And then I heard it, a faint, low whisper, coming from everywhere and nowhere. At first I thought I was imagining it. The sound was so soft, like the rustling of leaves or the breath of the wind. But there was no wind. The trees stood perfectly still. The clearing was perfectly still. Alex stood up, holding the amulet in his hand. He turned it over, staring at it like he couldn't look away. "It's beautiful," he murmured. I felt my stomach twist. Something about the way he said it. The air smelled strange now. Not just earth and stone, but something sweeter, almost metallic. I reached out and touched his arm. "Alex, let's go, please." He didn't move. Then the whispering grew louder. It was no longer soft. It was chanting. I turned around and froze. They were there. Figures, standing just beyond the stones. I hadn't heard them arrive, but they were there all the same. At least a dozen of them, maybe more, tall, thin, their faces hidden under hoods, but what little I could see of their skin looked wrong, too dry, too pale. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, black and gold all at once. One of them stepped forward, and I could see its face properly now. It wasn't a mask. It wasn't human anymore. Its lips were shriveled, its cheeks hollow, but its eyes burned with life. It pointed a bony finger at Alex. "You," it said. The word came out in a rasp that made my teeth ache. "You will take his place." Alex finally seemed to snap out of it. He dropped the amulet with a clatter and stumbled back. But it was too late. The chanting rose higher, louder, filling my head until I thought my skull would split. And the ground beneath the altar cracked open with a deafening roar. A blast of hot, sulphurous air rushed up, and hands, skeletal, covered in blackened flesh, reached out of the earth. They grabbed Alex's legs and began to pull. He screamed. I lunged forward, grabbing his arms. He kicked and thrashed, but the hands were strong, impossibly strong. They pulled him down to his knees, then to his waist. "Run!" he shouted at me, his voice hoarse. But I couldn't. I wasn't leaving him. I dug my heels into the dirt, pulling as hard as I could, and just as the chanting reached a fever pitch, his legs tore free. We both collapsed backward, gasping. We scrambled to our feet and ran. The figures didn't follow, but I could feel their eyes on us, feel their whispers crawling up the back of my neck. The clearing faded behind us, swallowed by trees. And then it was gone. When I glanced back, there was nothing there, just an empty forest, just silence. We didn't stop running until we saw the dirt road again. The guide was still there, leaning against the jeep, smoking a cigarette. He didn't even look at us as we stumbled back into the group, breathless and pale. No one said anything. The others just climbed back into the jeep as though nothing had happened. That night, back at the lodge, Alex barely spoke. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his feet while I cleaned the scrapes and bruises on his legs. The skin around his ankles was dark, almost burned, where the hands had grabbed him. When he finally stood up and went to shower, I noticed something on the back of his neck. At first I thought it was just a shadow, but when he turned slightly, I saw it more clearly. A faint black mark, the shape of the same sun amulet he'd picked up, perfectly etched into his skin. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe. And somewhere outside the window, just beyond the trees, I heard the chanting again, faint, but there. And then a whisper, a single sentence in Quechua. The sacrifice is not yet complete.